Hi, I'm Glenn Dakin, writer of the Scooby-Doo Essential Guide, and you're listening to a podcast named Scooby-Doo.
Yeah.
Hey gang, and welcome to another episode of a podcast named Scooby-Doo, the show that attempts to unravel 50 years of mysteries, meddling kids, and masked villains. My name is Mike Josick, and I'll be your guide through all things ghostly and groovy as I investigate every angle of every mystery and beyond. So grab yourself some Scooby snacks, fire up the mystery machine, and let's start the show.
It's late and we're all tired. I don't know about you guys, but I sure could use a hot shower and a soft bed.
Are you guys crazy? Who could sleep in a house full of books? Never mind. If you need me, I'll be in the library.
Hello, and thanks for joining me on this 54th episode of the podcast. I've got a great show lined up for you today, especially if you happen to be one of those people who finds themselves occasionally wondering, why didn't that show or movie I loved ever get released on Blu-ray or DVD? Or why, when it did come out, was it not quite how I remembered it? Well, my guest for this episode, George Feltenstein, has been dealing with the circumstances behind just those kinds of problems and decisions for the majority of his career. And that career started with him working to bring classic films to repertory and revival theaters before he joined MGM UA, where he went on to usher their film library into the burgeoning home video market with videocassette and laserdisc releases. He then would join Time Warner in 1997, and there he led initiatives involving the company's classic film and television library. In a joint effort with the Rhino Records label, he produced over 100 expanded and restored soundtrack CDs, some of those I'm pretty sure I have, and assisted Warner Home Video with their special edition DVDs, producing documentaries and other features that would be included on those discs. I guarantee I have many of those. In 2002, he formally joined Warner Home Video as Senior Vice President, Theatrical Catalog Marketing, which led to his involvement in developing the Warner Archive Collection, which is a boutique label launched by the studio in 2009 with the purpose of spotlighting and restoring classic films, television, and animation from the robust Warner library. Originally, at launch, they were working primarily or exclusively with classic films, and later moved on to television and animation, which is where you get those great Popeye, Tex Avery, Looney Tunes, and Hanna-Barbera releases that we've seen over the years. Currently, George is the Warner Brothers Discovery Library Historian, where he continues to bring his passion, knowledge, and years of experience to many projects undertaken by various divisions within the company. Now, for my 2 cents, you're about to hear a fascinating conversation. And while we do spend a lot of time talking history or classic films or non-Scooby cartoons, I do think that the obstacles faced and the problem solving involved with all of those projects goes a long way to inform a lot of questions that you may have regarding past releases of your favorites or potentially future questions down the line. Things like trying to find proper film elements or music clearances are all super common with putting these releases together, and also a likely culprit when you're wondering those queries that I highlighted from the top of the intro. Anyway, this was a lot of fun, and I'm excited to be presenting this conversation to y'all. I've enjoyed listening to George on other podcasts for years, so it was a great privilege to be able to chat with him on and off the record for a podcast named Scooby-Doo. I hope you all enjoyed the chat as much as I did, and as always, I will see you on the other side. I'm here today talking to George Feltenstein of, would you say you're officially of the Warner Archive, or are you part of a broader umbrella?
I oversee the Warner Archive collection and have since before its birth, its infancy, when it was in utero, it developed as an idea. But as part of my responsibilities as the Warner Brothers Discovery Library historian, I oversee all activities relating to the Warner Archive collection, as well as many other things within the studio.
And I can guarantee that probably most of my listeners have some Warner Archive product in their collections. But for anybody who maybe doesn't know, can you give a kind of quick rundown of what the Warner Archive is and what it does?
The Warner Archive collection is basically what I like to refer to as the boutique within the behemoth. We are essentially a label dedicated to collectors, what people consider rare and hard to find, what they would want. It started as a DVD manufacturing on demand business in response to the fact that we had 4,100 releases on VHS. When that sunset, we had 1,700 releases on DVD. And one of my colleagues, who eventually became the head of the division, wanted to develop some kind of way we could make things available that couldn't get a place on a store shelf. And that turned into what was the Warner Archive collection. It took about, I'd say, 4 or 5 years to develop the process. And on March 23rd, 2009, we launched with 150 films and soon added television and animation. And then in 2012, we expanded into Blu-ray very, very slowly because Blu-ray was a lot more expensive and we wanted to have the highest possible quality. And in the last, I'd say, 4 or 5 years, we've kind of sunset the DVD activities in order to focus on Blu-rays and releasing 5 or 6 releases per month. And our biggest goal is the highest possible quality. And that requires a great deal of diligence and work. And we really want to be proud of every release. And more importantly, we want consumers and collectors, of which I am proudly one of the public collectors out there. I buy my releases from other studios and want to support their efforts. Everybody should have the best possible product. And we strive to make something that is cool and hopefully reasonably priced.
And is the manufactured on demand model still the way the archive operates?
Well, all of our Blu-rays since the beginning are replicated just the same as any other Warner Home Video Blu-ray. They're replicated. The BDR format is something that wasn't going to happen on my watch because it's not compatible with many players. It's more likely to suffer damage. It just set a bad taste. So from the very beginning, we always want to make sure that everybody understood that we manufacture on demand for DVD. If something was going to be a big seller and we were releasing it on DVD, we would actually press the initial runs. And that happened with things like the Bowery Boys sets we did, or we were Secret Squirrel and Adamant, and all the original discs would be replicated. And then when sales started to decline, we would switch to the DVD-R model. So we went from 150 initial releases 15 years ago to over 4,000 now. And it is a way for the company to bring in extra revenue for physical media, and we're very proud of that. We've done about 500 Blu-rays, both film and television and animation, and those are all manufactured at the pressing plant that all the other Warner Brothers Home Entertainment releases are made.
I remember hearing you talking on another podcast about kind of early skepticism about the on-demand nature of and how statistically you actually had fewer errors on or defective discs on the on-demand than you actually did on the factory press stuff that was released widely, which I found amusing.
That's an incredibly good point, because when this was proposed that we were going to manufacture on demand using DVD-Rs, the discs we used were very expensive. They weren't the same disc that you'd put in your computer and burn a disc. So it was very expensive per disc, but we had to fight the concept, and it still exists today. People think of a DVD-R as a substandard product, and can't believe they're charging $20 for a burned disc, and people referred to them as coasters, and there was a lot of very, very nasty stuff on the internet when we started, for sure, because people love being nasty under the cloak of a fake name on the internet, and they still are. But ultimately, many people were very grateful that we were making so many things available. And 15 years later, we can go back to a 2009 Warner Archive DVD-R and it'll play back just fine. And it's no secret that some of our replicated discs from Warner Home Video from around that time and a few years earlier now won't play back because of the factory that we used at the time. So our discs are dependable. We stand by them. And overall, as a company, regardless whether it's Warner Archive or Warner Brothers Home Entertainment, if a consumer gets a bad disc, we will do everything we can to replace it.
The archive started off as basically exploiting the Warner Film Archive, the vast film archive. Obviously, you moved into animation. Warner has Looney Tunes, it has Hanna-Barbera, it has Popeye. These are all things that the archive has released in some form or another. Obviously, it wasn't there at the outset. How difficult was it to move into the animation? Maybe difficult's not the word I'm looking for, but we discussed off mic, there's obviously a broader interest in properties like Looney Tunes or Scooby-Doo, and Archive being a more boutique studio within the larger studio, to basically use these assets, but to do so in a way where, like the archive mandate of restoring, bringing things back into light that have been in the dark for a very, very long time, and targeting collectors rather than, I guess, maybe a mass market.
Well, it's actually a very interesting story that I think will help people understand if they're not already aware. My primary role here for quite some time, I started the Warner part of my career because I came here from being at MGM Home Video, where I was eventually the head of the division. I started here as the SVP of Theatrical Catalog Marketing. So my role here was working with the theatrical catalog. We had three divisions, basically. We had the theatrical new release division, we had the theatrical catalog division, and we had the kids and family / television division. And there were three separate business units. So I was part of the theatrical catalog business unit, but from the outset of my first day here, which was in 1997, the DVD was just about to be launched, and I had worked extensively with the pre-49 Warner Brothers cartoons that MGM had distribution rights to through Turner. And I had put together 5 Laserdisc collections, the golden age of Looney Tunes, with my good friend Jerry Beck, that basically made almost all the pre-49 Warner cartoons available to Laserdisc consumers. Those box sets were $125 a piece, and they had like 70 cartoons. Laserdiscs were incredibly expensive to manufacture. The raw manufacture of a single Laserdisc was $8.50. So if you had a 4-disc set, plus the creation of art and the lavish inserts and whatnot, those things had to be expensive. And that limited to collectors, but at least it gave them access to so many cartoons. So when I moved here, it was simultaneous with Warner Time Warner having purchased Turner Broadcasting. And so the whole Warner Brothers library was reunited because Turner had owned the pre-49 Warner cartoons. The pre-49 library was sold off in 1956 and basically wandered from United Artists to MGM to Turner, and then we bought Turner, and that put everything back together. So in 1997, being part of the theatrical catalog group, but also being the person that actually understood the cartoons, I began to advise that the Looney Tunes needed to be released for collectors and that it should also be released for the moms and kids category, that some of the cartoons would not be appropriate for younger audiences because they're a product of their time, but that we could approach it from both sides. So this went on for 6 years. It wasn't until 2003 that the first Looney Tunes Golden Collection came out, and there was also a sub-collection aimed at the moms and kids. But the Looney Tunes Golden Collection Volume 1, which was released in 2003, sold 650,000 copies. And now, living in the age where physical media has obviously suffered a decline, we look at numbers from the past and just our mouths drop. There was a period of time where home video sales brought more money into each studio than theatrical revenues or any other kind of revenues.
A movie could flop at the box office and they could recoup their costs with the DVD sales.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And nothing has replaced that level of revenue stream, because the revenue that comes from digital distribution, streaming, digital downloads, or digital rentals is not at the same level of what revenue was driven by the DVDs and then the HD DVDs for a few moments and the Blu-rays. That kind of hit its peak around 2006, 2007, 2008, and then we saw the decline. As it concerns what I do and what I have interest in with like the deeper catalog, there was never a place for classic films in most retailers. Walmart wasn't interested in having a film noir collection, but Best Buy was, and Tower Video was. Well, Best Buy most recently abandoned physical media. Tower Video went out of business. Virgin Video went out of business. And it really reduced the opportunity of the footprint at retail. But by creating the Warner Archive Collection, we had what was initially our own website, a direct-to-consumer ability. People saw a movie they wanted, they would order it, we would manufacture it and sell it and send it. And it was a very good step in the process. So how this all ties together is that, yes, the first 150 releases were theatrical features, but then I went to my colleagues in the kids group and TV and said, you know, what are you doing with such and such? Do you have any interest in this? I'll give you a perfect example. Was we had a series that ran from 1965 to 74 on ABC, 9 seasons, The FBI. It was all in color, great show. You couldn't get it anywhere. You couldn't see it. And all 9 seasons were mastered, and all 9 seasons were legally clear. They didn't have music problems. And we released all 9 seasons. And it went on from there. And with the animation, we knew we wouldn't be able to touch like Flintstones, Huckleberry Hound, Yogi Bear, the prime Hanna-Barbera stuff. But there was so much Hanna-Barbera material that had never seen DVD before. And we started to do that. We started to release some of the specials. We would come up with collections that were thematic. And the business just grew and grew. At one time, we were releasing 30 DVDs a month, which was an enormous task and had me up till 3 a.m. every night, literally. I wasn't getting much sleep, but we were a very small but dedicated group, and the business continued to grow and become more successful. And I remember when we started, probably after about 6 months or a year, other studios wanted to follow that business model. And we had visitors from another studio come to our offices for lunch. They wanted to see the floor where the Warner Archive was. And we laughed because it's basically like 5 people. So we really have always kept our focus on what consumers want and trying to make them happy. In more recent years, as the ability to get product on a store shelf has diminished dramatically, we have gotten the door opened on a lot of content. I hate calling films and TV shows content. On a lot of wonderful programs and films, I should say it that way, that would have been off limits to us. And our first entry into the Warner Brothers cartoons was a collection we put together of all the Porky Pig cartoons until he went full color in 1943, I believe, either late 42 or early 43. But it was basically all the black and white Porky Pig cartoons that were done as Looney Tunes. And it was comprehensive, and that's why we called it Porky Pig 101. It's 101 cartoons, and we did not have the funding to remaster all of them, and it was a disc collection that had warts, but it also was a way for people to have everything. And most collectors appreciated just the ability to have everything. Because of the success of that, after a couple of years, I went to the kids department and I said, we need to start releasing Looney Tunes on Blu-ray that have never been available on DVD or Blu-ray. And that led to the Looney Tunes Collector's Choice series that we started last year, which has been very successful and very gratifying. My goal is to try to get all the Looney Tunes out there, and that's complicated by the cost of, going back to original materials, and also some of the cartoons we are at this point not able to make available even with a disclaimer because the content is considered so offensive that our legal department will not allow us to make them available. And this is a situation that developed long before our current times, where there's a lot more sensitivity around all of that. But my hope is that we will be able to find a way to make more things available. And right now the focus is on I would say, several hundred more Looney Tunes that have not seen the light of Blu-ray and may have been on DVD, as well as those that have never been on any home video format at all. So it's a wonderful sandbox to play in, and I feel honored and grateful to do so. And my excitement going to work every day is the same as it was when I was a kid out of college. The excitement has never, and my passion for it has never waned.
Well, the material might not be coming out as fast as collectors and fans wanted to, but you guys are doing a great job. Those Looney Tunes collections that just came out, the Collector's Choice, Volume 3, I think came out in March or April.
Yes.
Those are great sets. Hoping there's going to be a Volume 4. And it's also...
Volume 4 is coming out November 26th. We did let people know that it's coming out.
Fantastic.
And we'll be announcing the contents of that probably in a few weeks. I did, and I will share it with you as well, I did appear, so to speak, on another podcast that was just recorded this week where I did leak that one of the restored cartoons that was freshly remastered for this release is a Sylvester cartoon called Pick Up Your Troubles. And it's always looked awful, and now it looks great. And then we're taking 2 cartoons as bonuses because they did come out on DVD, but they were shown in their theatrical aspect ratio, which basically cropped the top and the bottom. And animation fans were not happy with those releases because they wanted to see the full open matte image as animated that they were used to from television and VHS. So it's the complete opposite of the film community, which wants to see films exactly as they were projected and meant to be seen in the theater. The animation fans wanted to see the full frame. It's really staying true to how the film was originally shown. In the case of these theatrical Looney Tunes, there was a period where Warner Brothers had a backlog of cartoons and they released them in a widescreen format with the top and bottom cut off when they weren't animated that way. And consumers had a deliberate point that that was heresy because they should have been presented as the animators made them. By the time you got to the late 50s, all the cartoons were animated in anticipation of being shown in a 1:8:5 aspect ratio. However, they had already experienced the success of the earlier cartoons having hit television in 1956. So the thought is that they animated within the safety so that in the theater, if there was some lettering or whatever or action that was at the top and the bottom, they would make sure that it was within that 1:8:5 aspect ratio. But if you open it up, you're making it the way everybody saw it watching the Bugs Bunny Roadrunner Hour on TV or what they saw on VHS. So we've known for, over 12, 13 years with the classic animation, we present it in a 1:3:7 aspect ratio with sidebars.
I said you guys are doing a great job with the Looney Tunes. This year has also been a really good year for Hanna-Barbera. We've had the Hanna-Barbera Superstars. We had Top Cat, I think 2 or 3 days ago from time of this recording came out. And Johnny Quest is coming out, I believe, September 24th or 25th.
We have the double feature of those 2 telefilms, Johnny's Golden Quest and Johnny Quest versus Cyber Insects.
All on Blu-ray, I should
Yes.
qualify. I'm very curious, particularly with the Superstars, because it's a collection of 10 films.
Right.
What is the selection process for that? How do you decide what's going to get put out? And what restoration work, if any, was done on those films? Or remastering?
Well, with those 10 films, in most cases, we went back to the camera negatives, scanned at 4K, and created a new HD master. The last 2 of the Superstars 10 group, which was a first run syndication package that was sold to television stations in the late 80s, the last 2 were not finished to film. They did all that work and they finished it out to a 1-inch analog videotape, which was the standard videotape of the time. But we had nothing to go back to except those old tapes. So in order to keep the integrity of the Superstars 10, we had to include those last 2 films, which were Scooby-Doo and the Reluctant Werewolf and Yogi and the Invasion of the Space Bears. They don't look very good. They were up-converted to high definition, but the initial source is a 1-inch videotape. The technology to up-res 1-inch videotape to high definition is literally improving by the day and aided by AI tools. I've seen demonstrations just in the last few weeks of new tools that will improve that process. But in the meantime, we had all 10 of these available. I couldn't put them out without the last two, then they wouldn't be the Superstars 10. But I was really in a quandary because the quality is not really great. It's not what we're used to. So what I decided to do was to add something substantial to each of those discs. We put Scooby Goes Hollywood on the Scooby-Doo and the Reluctant Werewolf, which was a TV special from 1979 that was in HD. And we put something on Nice for Yogi as well, so that therefore it wouldn't seem like some kind of half-baked idea. The other thing that I did was I tried to make sure it was reasonably priced because it's 10 discs. But I also knew that not every fan would necessarily want everything. Some of the Scooby people would only want Scooby. Some of the Yogi people would only want Yogi. So I made sure that each one of the films was available as a single title, and we priced them at a $14.98 list price, which is much lower than we usually charge, so that if you bought the box, you were getting a huge value proposition, basically $7 a disc. But if you bought them separately, you were still getting a good deal for $14.98. So that's another factor that's very important, is that we want to come to the market with reasonable pricing. And it's interesting because I was mentioning the price of the laser discs and how expensive they were. And, now there are still people who bellyache over $15 or $20 for a Blu-ray disc. And it's like, it's something I can't quite wrap my head around. I think it's somewhat of a generational thing because people don't recognize that there was a time where you couldn't get anything because studios wouldn't allow their films to be sold, except in rare cases there were Super 8 abridgments for the home movie projector. Then home video comes along and people start to be able to buy cassettes and build libraries. DVD and then Blu-ray and now 4K UHD Blu-ray provide the ability to own the film or television show or animation collection on your shelf. No one can take that away from you. And that's why physical media is so important. Streaming is wonderful. I have 1,000 movies in my digital locker. It's very convenient. But if I want the very best quality and also want to know that suddenly a title will not disappear from my digital library because the company that owns it pulled the rights. That's never happened on a Warner title, but I do know that some other studios have taken things that were digital sales and suddenly it's not in your locker anymore. And we don't subscribe to that way of thinking, but unfortunately other people do. So there are some things that I bought on Vudu or Amazon or iTunes that disappeared from my library because maybe a rights license expired on music. I don't know. But that's not the consumer experience we support. That's why we're so strong on keeping a viable physical media force at hand.
I do think you said it's possibly a generational thing, and I do think that's a definite possibility because, like, there's a demographic that has grown up with piracy right at hand. There's a demographic that grew up with sell-through DVDs. Like, I've got on my shelf back here, I've got some pre-Matrix DVDs that I bought that are just bare bones releases that were like $36, $40 because before the Matrix, that's what DVDs cost. It wasn't like a big sell-through thing that you found at your grocery store counter and, all over the place. I did want to touch on, you talked about the Superstars 10 being split up into individual releases, which I thought was a great idea to be able to have that choice of selection. As a collector, I also found it maddening because if you buy the Superstars set, you get all the films, but if you buy them individually, you get the artwork.
I know. That was painful because I knew that some people would find it to be like Sophie's Choice, What do I
100%.
how what do I do? And in certain cases, I am the type of collector that understands the importance of mint in box. So some people will buy something just to have the packaging and not even open it. That's a big thing with steelbooks. People buy two steelbooks, one to use the disc and one to keep, wrapped and shrink wrapped and so forth and so on. So I thought that taking that approach was the most consumer friendly because it did provide a way for people to not be forced, if they didn't particularly care for one particular character, they weren't hemmed in. Choice, giving people freedom of choice is important. And we never can make everybody happy all the time. That is something that keeps me up at night, truly, because if a consumer isn't happy with something that we've done and their gripe is legitimate, there are many gripes out there that are so illegitimate that it's insulting and frankly foolish. But there are legitimate issues, and if we haven't done the best possible job, I try to make sure that we make good on what we've done and improve upon it. And we're always trying to improve the consumer experience.
Realistically, and I speak as a collector, I mean, it is kind of an entitled gripe because we are getting, you've got all the movies in a set. These are things that weren't available before on this format. And to be like, oh, but I wanted all the artwork. It's like, it's there. I mean, you can go get it if you want to go and buy the extra stuff.
And that's also why we went for the low price.
Yeah.
Because this way it wouldn't feel so painful. We could have released just all 10 in separate Amory cases and done that. But I also felt that the whole construct of what Bill and Joe tried to do was they really tried to embrace their history of bringing back certain characters that you hadn't seen in decades in terms of new productions. And we dug like crazy to find that original logo that was used not to consumers, but to television stations to get the license to broadcast the Superstars 10. So the legacy of Hanna-Barbera is a fragmented one because the ownership of Hanna-Barbera went through probably 4 or 5 different hands before it came to Warner Brothers. And some of the prior owners did not take care of the film elements. And when they took a series like the Huckleberry Hound Show, they split up the segments and didn't care about the original titles. And I even have to say, much to my embarrassment for our company, when the Magilla Gorilla Show was released on DVD, I had nothing to do with that release. I wish I did. How do you release the Magilla Gorilla Show without having the opening theme song at the beginning of each episode? That was mind-boggling to me. But that wasn't my business unit, so I just had to sit on the sidelines and go, okay. Well, we're now looking at trying to correct those, and I'm hoping that in the future we'll be able to release those properly as we have done with others.
Yeah, you've had that opportunity with Johnny Quest, for example, with the end titles.
And with Johnny Quest, putting back the deleted dialogue, there were some words omitted that were considered offensive. We're selling to the adult collector, not to children. So we put a little note on the packaging that, it was intended for the adult collector and may not be suitable for children. Just that one sentence satisfied the lawyers.
Do you see that as an opportunity? I mean, we kind of touched on how Big Warner has its interest in certain properties within their library, and Warner Archive also has an interest in certain things with a certain mandate that is more archival, more preservation. With a case like those Hanna-Barbera classic collections, I remember buying it. I remember the discourse at the time with the with the Johnny Quest credits, like I mentioned, with the dialogue being taken out. Do you see those as opportunities from the archive perspective to go, if we can get the right ear to listen to us saying, hey, we'd like to go back in and restore these to their proper like broadcast state. Yeah, is that an opportunity for the archive
Yes,
okay.
it's happening. With Top Cat, we went back to the original camera negatives.
Oh, so Top Cat is not just a port of the DVDs. This is a whole new.
Oh no, this is 4K scan of the camera negatives of every episode. And so no one has seen these shows like this, even when they were aired, because they were originally aired in black and white. I don't think they were shown in color until the Saturday morning, probably in the mid 60s, when they started using color as well on Saturday mornings. That's a whole other story of the battle of color television, and it's a fascinating story, and a depressing one. But basically, Hanna-Barbera had the foresight to make the show in color, as they did with the Flintstones. So going back to the camera negatives, I had thought, and this is the first place that I'm discussing this, I had thought, well, the camera negative will be having the original main title and everything that was on the end title. When we go to camera negative for a television episode, usually everything's in one place. Well, it turned out that the main title and end title materials were kept separate for some reason. And there was only one color element with end title credits for Top Cat. Only one. And it didn't properly reflect who wrote which episodes. So when we went into this project, I thought we would be able to restore all the end credits for each episode because I just thought they'd be part of the negative. They were cut off. They were not. We only had one color element. We have black and white, but we don't have color. So we had to use that same end credit for every episode. However, as was done on the DVD set, we have a set of credits that run at the end of the last episode that list everybody who worked on the series, all the writers, all the layout people, all whether it changed from episode to episode, everybody's name is there. It's a 45-second credit crawl that properly attributes who worked on the show. And that was our, we had that on the DVD. We have it on the last episode of the Blu-ray set. This way I feel we're giving credit where credit's due. We've also carried over all of the special features that were on the DVD, which were quite extensive. So it's going to be a disc that I think a lot of people will enjoy greatly.
We've touched on this several times over the course of this conversation where either due to lack of the proper elements or budget or time or whatever, there are things like the Porky Pig collection, which at the time you were just happy that that material was out there. The people were able to see these things that had never been seen before. We just talked about the Top Cat. I remember hearing on another podcast, Jerry Beck talking about Looney Tunes as well, where there was portions of a Bugs Bunny Roadrunner show in the 60s where to do a restoration would be this patchwork of like some black and white elements, some color elements. And obviously you would need the budget to colorize those black and whites and whatnot. What is it like from your perspective, that friction between access or availability and the perfect pristine presentation of a program? Because there's also, sorry, just to build on that a little bit, there's that idea of like releasing something in an imperfect form, and if it sells well, then it might tell the people up above that, oh, hey, there's a need or a desire for this. So then it might greenlight another format or a larger budget or another release. How do you juggle all of that or reconcile all of that?
It's certainly difficult because it would be my hope that we'd be able to come back with Porky 101 with all 101 cartoons properly mastered in high definition and cleaned. And when we work on the animation, what I've instructed my colleagues to do is we must repair any film damage. But if there's cell dust or if there's a speck that was in the original animation that the camera picked up, it's not film damage, you leave it, because that's what everybody saw from the beginning. There is another studio that has a lot of animation that probably people will figure it out. Their animation, most of it, when viewed today, it looks like it's in soap opera mode. It has no organic feel. So we've tried very hard to replicate what was projected on the screen when these were originally shown. Porky Pig 101 not only, there's a really interesting story there because some of the cartoons had wrong main and end title music because the main and end titles had been cut off from the film elements when there was a time that Warner Brothers had sold off the black and white Porkies a year before they sold the whole back library. And damage was done to a lot of those cartoon titles. So what we didn't know, neither Jerry nor I, was in the early 1990s, there was a big initiative to get Looney Tunes on Nickelodeon, and it was very successful. They colorized a lot of the black and white cartoons and were able to fix the main and end titles. Neither Jerry nor I had any interest in anything that was colorized, so we didn't know that there were sources that could have fixed that without having to go back to nitrate and so forth and so on. So that's a release I have ambivalent feelings about because I think it was a great first step and we got the entertainment out there, and ultimately that's what's important. But the fans are rightly so. They want meticulously what was original. That's why the Top Cat end credit thing is so heartbreaking for me, because somebody along the line said, we only need one set of end credits. And there is not any film in color with all the proper end credits. So that's why we had to create that combined credit roll. We could do a whole podcast talking about the Bugs Bunny show and all the iterations that happened for the subsequent 30 years on Saturday morning. And one of the things Jerry said to me when I made the move from MGM to Warner Brothers was, George, you've got to put out the Bugs Bunny show. You've got to get that back the way it was. And he didn't have to ask me that. I had the same passion. And I found out that the original camera negatives had been chopped up over the years irresponsibly as they would continue to condense and disembowel how those Bugs Bunny half-hour show episodes that were in prime time were created, because they went to all the trouble of creating new animation and bridging footage that would set up a particular episode so that it just wasn't three cartoons thrown together. And basically, subsequent employees who weren't thinking about anything but making a sale cut stuff out, didn't save it, so forth and so on. So I would say for the first time, I've been here now for 27 years. I would say for the first time in that period, probably in the last year and a half, we finally have colleagues in our preservation department actively working. We have black and white reference copies of very high quality, second generation fine grain positives. We have every episode in black and white as a reference. So will it be done with colorization? Will it be done with, and when I say that, it means going back to our animation department and having them color the animation as opposed to it being colorized by a person that doesn't have any connection to it. It would be very expensive, but I think it would be incredibly worth it. And I think we're seeing a very loud, I always knew they were out there. Jerry always knew they were out there, but there is a massive amount of fans who represent 4 or 5 generations that grew up, whether they grew up with them in theaters or on television, grew up with theaters, network television, home video, whatever. They love this stuff. These cartoons they're timeless American animated films, in my opinion. And people they've teased me, since college. When I ran my college film series, I always ran a cartoon before we had the features. And people say, oh, cartoons are for kids. That is the biggest problem. People don't realize these cartoons were created for adults, but appropriate for children of the time to see in a theater. And they need to be treated with the same respect that our best and most famous feature films are treated by. So we're in the process of trying to take on the process of those 52 half hours of the Bugs Bunny show to get them back together as best as we can. We're not even close. This could take another 4 or 5 years. We're literally searching archives all over the world because we understand that material was sent overseas. There may be some countries right now that are running things, Lord knows in what format, but that are running some kind of format of this animated material that we don't have here at the studio. So there is now a concerted effort to try to repatriate all the film elements that are overseas and go through everything. It's a painstaking process, but we have to protect the legacy of this company. And I'm so proud of my colleagues for having as much dedication to this effort as I do personally.
For those, for lack of a better word, imperfect releases, is there always a hope that you get the right person in the right department who has the power to say, go ahead and do this, and that you can actually, are those conversations ongoing? Do you nudge every now and then where you're like, it'd be nice to go back and actually do that one the way we wanted to do it originally, with technology improving, like you said, daily, like maybe some of those things become cheaper, format changes. Obviously, we've gone from VHS to Laserdisc to DVD to Blu-ray, gives an opportunity to do like a re-release. You said yourself that streaming has actually helped with this process as well.
Because it's another revenue producing business that can contribute to this, to support. For a long time, it was just, home video was the cash cow and home video could pay for everything. And I don't think that was ever the way to look at things, but that's how it was looked at one time. Now there are so many revenue opportunities, but there is also the reality that there's so much programming available on streaming services that it makes it hard to get the eyeballs to focus. I think if you give the consumer what they want, you'll get the eyeballs to focus. The Looney Tunes Collector's Choice Volume 1 was called Volume 1 because I really believed there would be a Volume 2, that it would be so successful that the financial performance would justify it. Because my first responsibility within this company is to deliver profitability to the shareholders of Warner Brothers Discovery. Passion and being a dedicated film enthusiast and television enthusiast and animation enthusiast, my own personal interests have to be further down the line. My responsibility is to keep things profitable for the company. And I believe our library is so rich and diverse that there is still so much left to be untapped that could unleash the faucets of profitable flow in the future. So I'm very upbeat about that. There are definitely situations where there's room for improvement, and we've finally been able to do things. We had one very important feature that was released about 20 years ago, where the person who was in charge of the mastering had revisionist color timing. And suddenly what was blue sky was now yellow. I don't know why that happened. I had nothing to do with it, but I also knew that I could no longer trust the acumen of this individual. So we've been able to go back and correct some of those wrongs with new formats and new technology to be able to put them out and have them look really, really good. The list of things we need to improve is monstrously long, knowing what we know now. But we release currently through Warner Archive about 6 releases a month. And the amount of work that goes into each release is so substantial that it creates just an enormous amount of work for the small amount of people that are focused on it. I happily spend my evenings and my weekend personal time in some way or another. Probably 50% of my leisure time is dedicated to things that are tied to my work. But the other side of it is my work is also what would be my hobby if I wasn't fortunate enough to be in this position. So it's not where, I have to work. It's like, I can't wait to see what this looks like, and it makes me very proud. I know I'm not going to be able to ever achieve a situation where I've pleased everyone, but I really want a satisfied consumer to be the result of our work. People don't run to their computers and the forums to say nice things or good things. Sometimes they will do it. Maybe they'll take a more leisurely trot. But when something's wrong, they're so thrilled to point it out, make an issue of it, think the world is coming to an end. And there are more serious problems in the world right now. But for me, this is my job. This is what I'm here to do. And there's a legacy of talents going back decades and decades. I feel my responsibility is to present their work as it was intended to be in the best possible manner. So that's something that's deeply important to me.
It's just nice to know as a collector that there are people like you out there who, even if something does come out in not its complete form as one would hope, that there's always that kind of drive or that interest. We've had corrections, like I said, made over the years with new releases and stuff. So it's heartwarming to know that when something comes out, it may not be like this is the only thing, but it's also, you're kind of grateful just to have it at all. You mentioned that Top Cat went back to the original film elements. Johnny's Golden Quest and Johnny and the Cyber Insects, did that also go back?
They were 4K scans from
Fantastic.
the camera negatives. They were made on film, and they look amazing. I do the chapters myself, so I was chaptering them, and just even looking at them on my tiny computer screen, because then I later saw, the final emulation disc before we go to replication. And I was just so happy that they look so great. It's not the most expensive looking animation in the world. It's television animation. It was done on a limited budget. It's limited animation. But both those specific telefilms, as I call them, they've never looked this great. And they sound great too.
That's awesome. I've got the original Warner Archive DVD for those two. So all the Johnny Quests, I'm looking forward to.
Well, you can see kind of where we were going, putting out The Real Adventures of Johnny Quest. And, we were Amazing Chan, the Chan Clan. Here Comes the Help. Here Comes the Hair Bear Bunch. C-Lab 2020. We were putting out all the Hanna-Barbera stuff that got overlooked. We would even run into problems where we were starting on the new Fred and Barney show and found out that the film elements had been edited. The original negatives had missing footage. I'm happy to say, so we had to put that on the side. Happy to say that we found secondary film elements to make the episodes complete again. And I'm hoping that will be released soon. Whether it will come through us or it will come through the mothership, I don't know. But all that work is ongoing. There has never been more attention paid to the Hanna-Barbera library than is right now, which is, I mean, my earliest childhood memories are watching Hanna-Barbera. So it means a great deal to me to see this happen. And I have met so many people that work there, and it was a very important cornerstone to so many people's childhoods, what Bill and Joe did. There are people that love the influence of I would say, the late 60s content, such as Johnny Quest and Space Ghost. That's when things went away from the cute, fuzzy animals to more cutting edge, like comic book material. We want to hit every touch point that they've done. So they did a series for first run syndication in the early 70s that was clearly adult aimed. I believe influenced a little bit by All in the Family, but it was called Wait Till Your Father Gets Home. It was a 2-season set.
That's one of Joe's favorite things they ever did.
The first season came out on DVD years ago. The second season never came out because there were some very heavy music costs. And I'm happy to say that the music costs have been paid and the whole series has been remastered. And I believe it is airing on television right now. We're planning a Blu-ray release. This is a scoop for your podcast. We're planning a release through the Warner Archive Collection in the near future.
This is why I'm so grateful that you come on these podcasts and you talk about these things, because a lot of times from the consumer point of view, like even not necessarily the collector, there are people in the community who are far less invested than I am, who also have very similar questions about a lot of these releases and why did it come out this way and why only this and why wasn't this included and blah, 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 blah. And to hear some of the nuts and bolts of how the process is, it really kind of contextualizes it and puts it into perspective where you might not think about music rights being an issue. You might not think of, oh, back in the 70s, somebody slashed the negative up. So, horribly.
I mean, I working here all these years, there was a long time where we weren't even allowed to go near the original negatives. There was a paranoia around them. We have scanners now that are so sophisticated where you can scan the negative, the sprocket holes and the splices are not in danger. They're not touched. And scanning, we'll look at a scan that was done in 4K in 2010, for example, and it was done at 10-bit. Our scanners now are 16-bit. So the difference between a scan done in 2010 and a scan done now, it's remarkable. The progress and the improvements are really earth-shaking, and they're going to continue to be. So the future holds great promise as long as I'm able to continue doing what I love doing and what I know the consumers want. There are so many groups of different kinds of interests, and I'm trying to hit all of them with what they want. And that's really, really difficult. But we listen, and if something isn't particularly in my own personal wheelhouse, I will reach out to someone who does have the expertise and ask them for their input. And as far as animation goes, Jerry and I have been working on projects for a very, very long time, going back to the MGM days, and it's all done because we love it. And we want to be able to give the consumers what we want ourselves, because we're among the group of people that are the collectors, the consumers, the passionate fans.
Speaking of what consumers want, myself as a consumer, I'm a huge special features person. And one thing that has maybe not been as prevalent on some archive releases and even some studio releases has been, commentaries have disappeared, featurettes have disappeared. Is that just a budget thing? Is that a market
Yeah,
thing?
yeah, that's exactly what it is. Look, I mean, at one time, this became a cottage industry. I'll say 20 years ago, even longer than that. We would spend enormous amounts of money creating new documentaries, and I was the executive producer of some of the documentaries. I won an Emmy for one of them because it was broadcast on PBS. Very proud of that. To not be able to do the justice to a film, to put a film out without any context is painful. One of the things that we have a very, very limited budget, and so we put the money into the master. I was very gratified. Not that long ago, I was reading on one of the forums, and there was a general consensus that people really think that Warner Archive quality is the best in the business for classic films and animation. And now television, we just released 2 very limited television series that only ran 1 year. Colt 45 and the Alaskans. We went back to the camera negatives. We've got the commercial breaks in some of them. It was thrilling. These were ones that collectors couldn't even find. I don't like to use the B word, but bootlegs. There weren't even bootleg versions of these out there. They were so rare. And people, please don't support piracy because it does take away our jobs, and that's not a joke. It's like stealing, and there's no way around it. You can justify it, but the best way to combat piracy, frankly, is to make the content available. And that was part of the Warner Archive's initial mission. So we have hundreds and hundreds of films that we were able to bring to DVD that we haven't gotten Blu-rays out yet. And I don't know if we will get to do them. The economics supported getting a DVD out there, but going back and creating a pristine Blu-ray is an expensive proposition. So I have done what I could to get special features for certain titles. If we have legacy special features, we can carry them over. If there are no special features at all, I always try to put something on there to increase the value. And the whole idea of adding theatrical cartoons that relate to the feature, it goes back to when we started doing Warner Night the Movies in 2003, and we made a big deal about it because you could either watch the movie or watch a movie, a newsreel, a trailer, a short, like you would have seen at that time in the theater in that year. So we always try to do something. But the cost of creating special features just became enormous. And it's one of the reasons why I value the partnerships that we have with very specially selected companies where we would license a title so that that film will come out with wonderful context. Working with Criterion Collection is a personal and professional joy for me because they're such great people. I've known them a really long time. And when we do work with Criterion, we know consumers are going to get all those extras that they love. At one time in 2005, there was an article on Slate, slate.com, and it says, "Is Warner Home Video the new Criterion?" We were doing so much with special features that people thought that our work was up to that level. And unfortunately, the budgets continued to be slashed, and our staff here has been highly impacted by layoffs over the last several years, and there just isn't the budget. In certain cases, there has to be something special. One of the things I'm very proud of from about 4 years ago, I guess. It was 3 or 4 years ago, was releasing The Curse of Frankenstein on Blu-ray, and where I begged and pleaded and got money to have new special features created. And that release was really well welcomed. That film is so important to the Hammer film fans. We had to do that. There are other films where we've been able to get something done. But my hope is that we'll be able to do a little better in that department. And I've always apologized to the consumer by saying the money is in the master.
Yeah.
And that's something I can stand on my feet with pride. People know when they're getting something from Warner Archive. It makes me feel so joyous when I read somebody say, "Oh my God, this disc is just gorgeous." It's a shame that there aren't any special features, but the movie looks great. So by having these strategic partnerships with companies like Shout Studios and the wonderful folks at Arrow Films, which is a relatively new partnership, and Criterion, we are able to give certain films the contextualization that they're due. That's why Citizen Kane came out on 4K through Criterion and not through our internal mothership. It's a hugely important film, and it was also one of the first, if not the first, Laserdiscs that Criterion ever did when they started 40 years ago. So it just seemed right to have them do that title. So between our partners and our own activities, I think we're doing a good job. I would love to have the funds to be able to do special features much more frequently. But it's just a matter of economics and our need to be a profitable department.
That's what I figured. I've been doing the podcast for, I think, 7-ish years now. And, you talked about the mom and kids. You talked about people viewing cartoons as just for kids. And I had access to people through interviews, and it kind of became a thing where I would start sitting down with people if they were game and just watch an episode and do a commentary, because not viewing the wider releases of Scooby-Doo movies, for example, as focused or targeted at a collector, people who would be interested in commentaries and stuff like that, that ended up being something that just became kind of a mandate of the podcast on top of the interviews and the oral history to go in and do commentaries. So it's kind of been producing some special features of my own.
Well, that's a wonderful thing. And, all over YouTube, there are podcasts and review or critical reactions or whatever. People are sharing their thoughts and comments on all sorts of programs, features, television shows, cartoons. I think it's fantastic. And it gives the people an opportunity to say something. One of the things I don't think is so great is there are some of the smaller companies that put special features on their discs that aren't very good. So suddenly everybody's a film historian. These people you've never heard of who don't really know what they're talking about. And it's just babble, but they can promote, we have a commentary on this disc. Well, that doesn't cut it with me. To have people who really know their stuff, that's why we're very selective about who we partner with. But opening up the partnerships has been a very rewarding thing because it's done justice to our library and it ultimately benefits the consumer. And there have been titles that we released on Warner Archive where there was later a release with all sorts of goodies that came from one of our partners. And everybody wins under those scenarios.
One of the members of the community had a question for you in regards to the new Scooby-Doo movies release, which I know was a big Warner release and not something that you had a hand in, but maybe you can speak to it. They wanted to know, with the new Scooby-Doo movie release that came out a little while ago, there was the whole thing with leaving out the Addams Family episode and how some of the episodes are apparently Turner rerun edits, and the Sonny and Cher episodes are missing scenes. Is that anything you can speak on, or
I can say that I had absolutely nothing to do with those releases. As a matter
okay,
of fact, Scooby as a character being so popular was completely off limits to us. And when I discovered that Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island was not on Blu-ray, I was shocked. And I asked, and they said, sure. They weren't focused on that, or the Witch's Ghost and the Alien Invaders. I knew that that specific group was very popular with fans, and they said, yeah, go do it. So there will be more Scooby coming from us with that extra degree of care so that, it's not animation needs to get a very healthy bit rate. It needs to have lossless audio. It shouldn't be treated like a second class citizen. I think that my input will help other things that other divisions do because we are, all colleagues and we all work together. And I live to help anyone in this company do a better job with whatever they're doing that involves what we bring ultimately to people and have our library presented in the very best light. The one thing I can tell you about the Scooby-Doo movies thing, where it was like the almost, I know that there were huge clearance issues to try to do that, and that they had certain people that absolutely refused to sign off on letting those things be. Music clearance is also a huge, not specifically to what you were asking about, but not as much on old feature films, but certainly on old television and certain animated classics. Music clearance is an enormous problem. It's very expensive, and the music publishers have us by the cookies, and they can charge really high prices and make things very difficult. So that when we do finally get something cleared, it's a big deal. And then we can make it available for people to own. I don't usually run into it on the classic films, but there was a recent release, The Man I Love, a 1946 movie with Ida Lupino, directed by Raoul Walsh, that opened at 96 minutes, but everything we had was 90 minutes. And I assumed this is one of the cases where Jack Warner cut a picture down so he could re-release it and have it be less footage and get two movies in one double feature. That was done a lot. And as we were getting ready to remaster the film, we found that a very famous song had been cut out of the movie, and that was what the 6 minutes were, because the song was in the film twice instrumentally and once vocally. I went back and found a music cue sheet that said removed April 1956, and it had lines drawn through that one song. I figured out that's when they were selling the library. They were selling it so the library could be sold on television. They probably didn't want to take out a new music license. We licensed the song, the disc came out, the film was restored, the footage restored. Every release has its own story. I would bet that there's not one single release that it's just smooth sailing, easy, no problems. Everything is there. When you're getting into older properties, it becomes very complicated. Music issues are why you don't see yet Quick Draw McGraw on home video. There were 5 episodes that got cleared for video cassette, and you saw those on these Saturday morning cartoons compilations that came out in like 2007, 2008. I actually put those together for the kids group. The early ones. I don't think I had anything to do with the 80s ones. But, we still have to clear the music for Quick Draw McGraw and remaster it and hope we find all the parts of it. That has yet to happen. And on a lot of the old classic Warner Brothers detective shows, they always had somebody singing a song. And those songs cost money. So when people say, why isn't this out or why isn't that out? there usually is a story. There's always an answer. And if I don't have the answer because the question hasn't been asked, I'll research it and find out. So I'm looking in back of you as we talk. I know your audience can't see you, but in back of you is Popeye.
Mm-hmm.
And when I first started working at MGM Home Video, my first day, because they had the Turner Library, which was the MGM Library, Turner basically sold the name MGM and the production unit MGM, that's now Amazon owned, but it's really United Artists. Turner kept the library. MGM UA Home Video had a license to the Turner owned properties. So my first day, I wrote a memo about the Popeye cartoons. Why have these not been released? Because I knew as a consumer, there had been a best of Popeye MGM UA video cassette announced that never got released. I found out that King Features Syndicate held on to the home use rights to Popeye, and that precluded a home video release. And I am not exaggerating. It took 18 years from that time that I first wrote that memo until we were able to make a deal with King Features that freed up the Popeye cartoons for home video. And that's when the Fleischer cartoons came out in those DVD sets. And that's why we were able to do the Blu-rays with the early famous Studio Technicolor shorts from the 40s. That wouldn't have happened if I hadn't made my deal. And I'm a persistent guy, so I don't give up easily. I am the advocate for the fans. Even though he's not here when it comes to animation, Jerry is my co-advocate, and it's not a matter of remuneration. It's a matter of dedicated personal passion. And I'm so fortunate that we've had a very long friendship and that he is so enthusiastic and excited about this stuff as I am. And we love working together and bringing these things to the fans of animation. So there will be more Scooby coming from us, and we'll make sure that everything is right. If I know that there's something wrong if we don't have something complete, it may not get released until we can fix that problem. If it's something that I know there's no way we're ever going to be able to do that. If the movie Greed was completed at 8 hours and ended up being 2 hours, 15 minutes, that footage was thrown away in 1924. We're not going to be able to fix that. We did deal with it in the video cassette days by doing stills and whatnot, but if I know that there's a possible scenario to make things right, we will wait until we can do it right.
It sounds like the things that we love are in good hands.
Well, thank you.
All right. Well, George, sounds like Warner Archive and Hanna-Barbera have a very bright future ahead of them. So thank you again for coming on the show and talking
welcome.
Process and stuff. Hopefully, maybe sometime in the future, you'll come back on and have another chat.
Consider it an open invitation. If I have the time. And Fridays are really good because people usually work from home, but I don't. So it's really been nice to meet you, Mike, and to talk with you. And I'm delighted to have had the opportunity. You're now part of the group. So I'm delighted to have connected with you, and it's been a pleasure.
Fantastic. And there you have it. That was my conversation with Warner Brothers Discovery Library historian George Feltenstein. It was a blast having George come on the show and talk shop, and kind of cool to get a couple of exclusives in there too. I'm really looking forward to the next time we get to sit down and do this, and I guarantee you there will be a next time. The future looks really bright for Hanna-Barbera releases. From what George has said, the studio has never had more interest in the Hanna-Barbera properties, so fingers crossed that we get a lot of fun stuff, and when stuff is coming out, I'm sure I will reach out to George and we'll get the lowdown on those releases. Be sure to check out the Warner Archive for all your Hanna-Barbera needs, and give them a follow on social media at Warner Archive on Twitter and Warner Archive on Instagram. Hanna-Barbera Superstars 10, Top Cat, and the Johnny Quest TV movies, Johnny's Golden Quest and Johnny vs. the Cyber Insects are all great HB releases this year, and I urge everyone to support them if you can by picking them up and letting WB know that we want these high-quality releases of HB products. The folks at the archive are putting in a lot of work to make sure that we get great stuff, and the way to tell the higher-ups at the mothership that we do indeed want this material out there, that we will support it, is to go out and buy it. So again, if you can, if it's within your means, vote with your dollar. Also, I just want to give a quick hat tip to George and the Warner Archive team for always striving to provide the best that they can and to make everything available in the best possible format and presentation. It's so appreciated, and it's so important that this work is done and that people like George and the Warner Archive team are behind projects like this, because there have been other releases from Warner Brothers and from other studios that you look at, and clearly there's a different philosophy at work, and the fidelity of what makes it to retail is not exactly great. So keep up the good work, Warner Archive, and we look forward to seeing what you have for us down the road. Now, if you want to let me know what you think about this show, about the podcast, about home video, about physical media, hit me up on the show's socials. I am at Scooby-Doocast on Twitter, a podcast named Scooby-Doo on Instagram and Facebook, scoobypodcast@gmail.com if you wanted to email me, or show's also posted on YouTube, and there is a comment wall there. Feel free to drop a comment anytime. Also, like, follow, and subscribe to the socials and the channels. It helps with the algorithms and helps get the show into the eyes and ears of folks who might be interested in this content. Also, feel free to share on your personal social media any episodes or commentaries from the podcast. Word of mouth is a strong tool, and not afraid to weaponize it. Oh, and I guess there's also the blog at scoobydoocast.wordpress.com, which hasn't been updated in a bit, but there are interviews there, some text interviews called the Apocalypse Variations, as well as some added value content for some of the interviews when I talked to folks who worked on the DC Hanna-Barbera books. Some of them shared sketches and character outlines and whatnot, which all kind of support the stuff that we were talking about in those interviews, but they are posted on the blog. So if this is your first time listening, or you haven't quite made your way over there yet, that could be something of interest for you, and feel free to make your way over there at your leisure. So with that, I will bring episode 54 of a podcast named Scooby-Doo to a close. Once again, thank you everyone for your continued support and spending a little time with me and my guest today. I hope everyone is taking care, staying safe, and we will be sure to see you next time on a podcast named Scooby-Doo.
Whose name is Kyle! The hovering balladeer! Kyle! Everybody cheer! This is how we solve the mystery. This is how we solve the mystery. So in summation, this narration is my donation to the art of mystery solving dictation. And here's what the bad guys say when they play where the law forbids.
Would have gotten away with it too if it wasn't for you meddling kids.
This is how we solve the mystery. Bye.